Good afternoon, everyone. I see folks starting to filter in to our farm country update here. I'm going to give it just a minute to let the counter continue to tick up so that we have a great audience here to engage with over the next hour. So this month's farm country update is really all about sustainability, regenerative agriculture, and what we've learned about supporting producers in making change. In just a minute, I'm going to have our fabulous panel introduce themselves. Still just letting folks come on in as the timing comes here. Just a couple of pieces of housekeeping before we dive in. The first is at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you will find something that says Q&A. And if you click on it, it is a great way to ask any of us a question. We can see it and can engage in conversation with you all that way. So why don't you go ahead and locate that because we do want your comments and perspective. The other thing I should mention is that this is being recorded. So we are being recorded right now, and this will be available on farmjournal.com on our website within 24 hours of this being recorded. So let's dive in to today's topic. I'm going to give a little bit of framing and then we'll get into it. So as I mentioned, this is really about the regenerative agriculture change journey for producers. What have we learned? How are we supporting folks? Where are we? So as I thought about this topic at this time, one reason that we are having this webinar this week is because many of us, and hopefully many of you, will be in Minneapolis next week for the Sustainable Agriculture Summit, which some of us like to call Sustainable Ag Prom. It is when we get to see each other, hang out, and have conversations. So we wanted to precede the summit with a little bit of conversation. And as I thought about what are we likely to be talking about in the halls in Minneapolis, I thought about this really does feel like a regrouping and regrounding time for sustainable ag. I've been at this for 30 years. I have seen ebbs and flows. I have seen continued progress, but it has not been even. It's not been steady. It comes and then falls back and surges forward again. And what I'm seeing is definitely a time of regrouping. We're seeing companies start to realize that those 2030 goals that they set are not so far in the future. We're seeing that there are increased requirements for proof for making claims, which is probably net a good thing, but that also comes with a burden of record keeping and data, which we'll get into today. And we see budgets tightening. And so against that backdrop, I also think that we are seeing no ebb in the demand of stakeholders and especially international consumers that want to see American agriculture continue to lead on sustainable agriculture, for the way that we produce our goods and our commodities to sort of meet their needs and expectations. So we have the burden of both feeding a world as well as doing it in a way that meets consumer expectations in the United States and abroad. So over the next 54 minutes, we're going to take a deep dive into some of those macroeconomic trends and how they will impact us over the next 12 to 24 months. So with that, I'm going to talk less, turn it over to the panel. I'll start by introducing myself. I'm Amy Sketchless-Cole. I'm the president of Trust in Food, as well as producer intelligence here at Farm Journal. What that means is that I have the pleasure of getting to use the data and information that we have across the Farm Journal family in order to support producers, companies, NGOs, universities, and even the US government in helping producers get what they need in order to evolve their operations in the ways that work for them voluntarily. We sit on an enormous amount of data and information here. We get to put it to work for that kind of goal. So let me start by asking our panel to introduce themselves. Here at Farm Journal, producers always come first. So Liz, I'm going to turn it over to you and have you tell us a little bit about who you are and why you're here on our panel today.
Hi, Amy. Thank you for having me today. I am a fourth generation farmer here in Northeast Alabama. Goodness gracious, y'all, I don't even know where I live most of the days. It's Northwest Alabama. We row crop farm, cotton, corn, soybeans, and wheat. I get to do that alongside my brother and my daughter, who is the fifth generation farmer here. And I sit on this panel today because I'm a full believer in the opportunities that were presented to us by Trust in Food, and the ability to really dig deep into other sources of nutrition, soil health, aside from our traditional inputs. You know, we're at a tough place in the agricultural industry right now, and we've got to be creative, and our operation has been afforded some great opportunities through Trust in Food and our partnership with Farm Journal, and want to represent that here today.
Thanks, Liz. It's great to have you here. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule. Deborah, likewise, long-standing partner with an incredibly busy schedule. So why don't you tell us about who you are and why you are here?
Thank you, Amy. Thanks so much for having me as a part of this panel, and looking forward to the conversation today. I serve as a Senior Director of Communications and Partnerships at Environmental Initiative. And Environmental Initiative is a small but mighty nonprofit, home-based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And we are working to bring voices from community, government, private sector, and nonprofit together for conversations and action to change systems in positive ways. We are really excited to be part of this systems change work in agriculture, in a number of our different programming areas. And for this work, the work that I'll be leaning into today really started with the Midwest Row Crop Collaborative, which is a small group of NGOs and corporations working across the entire systems supply chain, in agriculture. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. It's great to have you here. Andy, my colleague here at Trust in Food, why don't you tell us about your work?
Yeah, thanks, Amy. Andy Lyon here, Director of Farmer and Rancher Technical Assistance for Farm Journal Trust in Food. I work across all of the Trust in Food influence programs, but am really here today to talk about some of the early results and learnings from our Connected Ag Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities grant, and feel that some of the things that we're learning are really indicative of what we see across the sustainability and regen ag space at the moment. So very happy to be here.
Perfect. Okay, let's dive into our first topic. I don't think we could start a conversation today if we don't start with the economy. Next slide. So let's just talk about where we are with the ag economy. I bet most folks on listening to this are going to be understanding this, but just in case not, we are in a tough spot economically across much of agriculture. We're in an era of lower commodity prices, but we have not seen input costs fall commensurately. And we still have relatively high, I know there have been a few rate cuts, but relatively high interest rates. So as this chart shows, what you can see is that we're in a time of negative farmer returns, in which the cost of doing business, including cash rent for land, is in some places higher than the actual return for the work. That's a tough place for any agricultural producer to be. Let's go to the next slide. And so one of the things that means is that we have seen huge amounts of consolidation across agriculture, in family farms consolidating, largely with other family farms. America still is made up vast majority of family farms, but those are getting bigger and growing. And in fact, our friends at American Farmland Trust tell us that no matter what it looks like, there are multiple hundreds of millions of acres that are expected to change hands in the next 20 years. Part of that will be some farms growing bigger, some folks moving out of agriculture. So the reason I bring this up is that it seems like there is a big conversation in the world of sustainable agriculture. Does a tough economy mean that we'll see more folks being willing to discover what alternate income streams or cost share could look like for sustainability practices on their operation as a revenue source or as a risk mitigation strategy, financial diversification strategy? Or do these tough times mean that it is time to hunker down, focus on yield, and focus on controlling every single thing that you can? So, Liz, I want to start with you.
Yeah, did you say Liz? Because I hope so. Because
Yes,
I'm just like
yes, I
dying
did,
to
of course.
speak.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
I think it's a two-pronged approach to answer your question. I think we have to hunker down and we have to be mindful of the expenses, but more importantly, I think that we've got to take every opportunity and seek every alternative income stream that we can in order to bridge the gap for a period of time. We are not at a place where commodity prices are sustaining. I mean, to your point, in some cases, we're planting into the negative. We're losing money just to roll across the ground. Why do we do that? We do that because a generational farm is farming on a 7-year or more time frame. You're looking at you're going to have good years and bad years. But the problem that we're encountering today, Amy, is that we've run up against too many black swans. And I'm a former banker, a reformed banker, if you will. So, we've got all these anomaly situations that really are compounding the need for us to be resourceful. And I think farmers are naturally resourceful, and I think there's a lot more at their fingertips than they even realize today. I think that they can leverage what they're doing and be involved in a lot of other programs than they even realize.
So talk a little bit maybe about what kind of decisions have you made on your farm as it relates to sustainability and why?
So I would tell you that I took the farm operation kind of at the helm in 21 after my father passed. And he had left us a great foundation and a great legacy. However, what got us here will not get us there going forward. And that is a life lesson that I've stood on and I believe wholly in. And so it required us to pivot in a lot of directions. We pivoted as it related to seed technology and chemistry technology. For the very first time, I can proudly say that our farm is wall-to-wall cover crop this year. That's something we've never done before, but we're digging deep into the fertility bank that we've been building year after year after year, and we're looking to retain that. And so cover crop is our way of really trying to dig deeper into that bank of fertility and not have those input expenses of commercial or natural fertilizers.
So Andy, how does that jive with what you're hearing on the ground? Talk a little bit about who you're out talking to, how much talking you're doing, and what you're seeing in terms of the economic impact.
Yeah, Amy, it's a great opportunity we have, because we are out there across a good swath of the country talking to hundreds of producers. And what we continue to hear is that, there's still a pretty strong appetite for implementing climate smart regen ag practices on the ground. Now, in this economic environment, I do think that the access to financial assistance becomes really important, right? Not just because it lessens the risk that producers are taking by implementing these practices, but quite frankly, because I mean it's a revenue game at this point. They have to show, especially their bankers, on how this is going to pencil out in the short term. But I think it's also an opportunity. When we think about regenerative agriculture, limiting inputs and utilizing the ecosystem services that healthy soil provides really does have a positive ROI. And so, again, in these tough economic times, producers are really looking for any way that they can cut back on some of those input costs. And so, again, really need to make sure that the financial incentives are available, that producers understand how to get in touch with those opportunities. But I do think we can continue to see additional adoption of regen practices even through these tough economic times.
So let's just get a little specific on the economics. What inputs are you all seeing a reduction in, or what costs are you able to see reductions in at this point? I know it's going to be varied from producer to producer, but what are we talking about here?
So I think the big example that I would give, Amy, is, and Liz kind of touched on this, drawing on some of that fertility that you've built over the years. And so we see many producers who want to really use some precision nutrient management, really look to cut back those fertilizer inputs, also really looking at soil biological amendments to try to unlock some of that, those nutrients that they know they have in the soil, but they need to make plant available for this next crop. And so, certainly cover crop comes into play there as well, trying to, make some of those nutrients available to the subsequent crops. So I think those are some examples of how we can make this happen in the short term that will benefit this, 25 growing season crop.
Deborah, how are you hearing your partners talk about this? From an economic standpoint, I mean, the ag economy hits our farmers, ranchers, and growers. It also hits folks across the supply chain. What are they hearing as they think about their sustainability initiatives?
Well, one thing I want to go back to one thing that Liz mentioned is that farmers have more at their fingertips than they probably realize. And we'll dig into that a little bit more, I think, in the conversation when we talk about how people connect in agriculture. But I appreciate that tease, Liz. But the one thing that we see just not going away is the emphasis on partnerships, like partnerships throughout the supply chain, and really looking at how each organization within the supply chain can support each other and really look at maximizing benefits and opportunities in ways that people aren't replicating work or programs. They're just really starting to work together in places that weren't really open before. And I think we see that with obviously the USDA climate smart commodities work, but also in the smaller collaboratives like the Midwest Row Crop Collaborative, and testing programs in different regions and really pushing what's possible to make the benefits across the supply chain, but also for the farmers, and make it worth their effort to be a participant in conservation agriculture.
One of the things I know I am hearing, maybe said more quietly than screamed from the rafters, is from a corporate standpoint, no one company, no matter how big, can really afford to drive all of the change that they need on their own.
Absolutely. Right? Yeah.
And so that is sort of a realization of, set lofty goals, set them long term in the future, but then as that future creeps up on us, realizing what it takes in order to support change on the ground. It does feel like it is starting to drive some more creative at scale systems kind of thinking. Okay, Brock, if you could put up the next slides. I want to talk a little bit, and Liz, I'm going to put you on the spot, so I want to give you advance notice here. But I want to talk about data, specifically data around how producers are going about their business, the practices and decisions that they're making on the ground. I have said, and I don't actually, this is not tongue in cheek, that sometimes it seems to me like what producers are actually getting compensated for is not either the practice change nor necessarily the environmental outcome, but the data that proves that that practice change happened. Data has become this huge business. We see this influx of organizations and technologies to help both producers as well as the supply chain measure, monitor, record, and verify MMRV, what's going on the ground. What I'd really like to know, Liz, is as you think about this, how do you feel about the data that you're being asked to share, and who you're sharing it with? And you can talk a little bit about the end markets that you're serving. But before we dive into that, let me give you 2 data points, and you can tell me whether you're in sync with this or out of sync with it. But we have a long-standing partnership with the Sustainability Consortium to ask producers generically these questions, and to gather this information, because we do understand that data is one thing that unlocks those financial benefits for producers. And we have consistently, over years and years, seen that there is a reticence by producers to share their agronomic and decision-making data. So what you see here is that a majority of row crop producers are reticent. We actually, in this last year, compared it to livestock producers, knowing that livestock producers are often required to share more data. And we did see that livestock producers, in this case, hog farmers, had a more willingness to share data. So there is something about being conditioned to do that there. But the thing that really stood out for me here was context. In each case, producers wanted to know, how are you going to use this data? And then if you go to the next slide, Brock, the other thing was that producers felt like they needed to be compensated for this data. I imagine it takes a lot more work and energy and time to gather and record the data than it does to keep it in an envelope in the cab, right? So a vast majority of producers said there is not fair compensation for gathering that data today. And then you can see some of the other barriers that we have been tracking around data sharing. The top, beyond the economic, is privacy, unsurprisingly. But then I was a little surprised about the difficulty and the challenge of, do you have the technology, the know-how, the time, and the energy to do it? So let's leave it there. Liz, what's your experience?
So what I would, Amy, I would tell you is that our operation today lives and dies by the data. Again, you know, the approach by each producer is a little different. And my approach is that the data is out there. And the concern is that it's going to be used as a strategy against the producer. If they know our yield, if they know how much of our chemical that we're using, then it's going to be consequential in the future. And while that very well may be the case, we can't predict the future. What I do know is that thanks to Facebook and iPhone, I think all the data is all in the cloud everywhere. So what I see for our operation as an opportunity was, let's harness this data. Let's get to the places that it will incentivize us for providing it to them. And once that process kind of begins, it just builds on itself. You know, you see phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and if a producer understands that if I just start a little bit, and maybe I use my John Deere or my Case IH data, and maybe I use my soil sample information and whatnot, and make those data share partners, you know, share that data with partners that can incentivize, I promise my personal experience has been, and I can't speak for anyone else, is that it's made us more money than it's hurt us. So today I'm trying to survive. I can't predict what's going to happen in the future. But today, that data, we live and die by it, because it is truthfully what is what's creating opportunities like with the Trust in Food Climate Smart grant opportunities, with multiple opportunities, carbon programs. It doesn't have to be as difficult as it sounds, but starting somewhere is critical.
Okay, so since it's in the public domain, I'm going to ask you to share a little bit of like, who are you marketing some of your commodities to with? And what kinds of data are you being asked to share with them?
So dependent upon the commodity, so with our grains, corn, soybeans, wheat, today, I'm trying to get somebody to go, hey, I've got this information around traceability, isolation of small batch, all of those things. We just haven't gotten somebody. So maybe this call is going to get me a new relationship. Come on, somebody in grain. But I will tell you, as it relates to fiber, cotton farming, it has opened the door to premium markets. It's opened the door to direct vendor relationships. And what they're looking for is a sustainable, regenerative, traceable product that they can market with authenticity to their consumer, because the retailers understand we're not playing anymore. As consumers, we're not buying the fluff and puff. If you don't do what you said you're going to do, the feet and mouth don't line up, we'll catch you in that pretty quick. So the direct relationships that we have as it relates to our cotton marketing, it is to provide a transparent product that they know that they can market to their consumer. And today you can buy Sproul Farms items in the store at one of the pink or maybe red stores.
Some of us may be wearing some of it. That is fabulous.
Maybe so. I don't know.
I want to make sure that.
But again, the data. I was just gonna reiterate. If it were not for the ability of us being able to be so transparent to them, that opportunity would not have arisen. So
great. So I just want to make sure the audience knows that there's a Q&A function on your Zoom. You may have to jiggle your mouse a little bit to see it at the bottom or the top of your screen, but you're welcome to please add in questions. I know folks have better questions than I have, so let's get them on in. While we wait for that, Andy, talk about the Climate Smart Commodity Connected Ag grant that you're working on, and how you're thinking about data within it.
Yeah, I think a number of our early enrollees aren't quite as far down the path as Liz is. And so, where we see that is, through our grant, we provide access to a digital data management platform to producers. We provide some data coaching on helping them get their data migrated into those tools where they can use it. But I think we still clearly see that there's still some trepidation, right? They understand that data has value, but that's how do we monetize that value? And if we're not able right at the moment to bring them a clear way to get paid for that data, there's some trepidation about, what am I going to do with this in the future? And, we keep telling them, hang on with this. We're going to try to help build these markets. But I'll be honest, not everybody's quite as gung-ho about it as Liz is. And so, it's still a bit of a challenge. Producers see and want to use these tools, but they're still a little skeptical that the dollars are actually going to be there in the end.
All right, before we move into Deborah, I want to read the question from an audience. So, question for Liz: what are some examples of data you're asked to collect? Like, what kind of data fields are you being asked to collect, and are you able to share them with your end market?
So field boundaries. imagery of the field throughout the year, the planting data. So if our planter goes through the field, we know exactly how many seed, exactly where we planted. The same thing for application, variable rate application, so nitrogen reduction or other. So right now, our data is reporting a forage mix, which is where we've planted cover crop for the winter. So it's truly just entering into the monitor. If you're using whatever technology, what you're doing, and that being, creating as simple as an Excel output file.
And then what does your buyer do with that data? Do you know?
So what the buyer does with that data is, from my perspective, is have the validation that they know that the feet and the mouth line up. If it's a program that I'm working with, because I kind of speak, both sides of that. So if it's maybe a climate smart program where I'm saying I've planted a cover crop, then I consider them my buyer. That to them is the validation that I did indeed plant that. They could see that field boundary and see where that planter ran exactly.
I think that feet and the mouth line up may have to be the like social media takeaway of this panel here. Deborah, how do you all think about data as you work across a consortium of organizations and a consortium of players on the ground? What role does data play in all of?
For us, the data is really a important tool to understand who producers are and thinking about what programs we offer, and how do we get them together? What kind of matchmaking? Are we providing things that are not necessary? Do we need to dig in deeper to opportunities that we maybe didn't think about? So looking at data at a big high level, we're able to listen to producers through what they tell us on how they engage in their buying patterns. They can tell us through surveys what they really care about, what they're scared about, what they're hopeful for. They can let us know. We talked a little bit about generational farming. They can let us know whether they're interested in selling or whether they want to keep it in the family. So what does that look like? And what do people in the supply chain need to understand in order to help the producers that they depend on be successful?
Makes a ton of sense to me. Okay, I want to dig in a little bit. We've talked about two macro trends, right? We've talked a little bit about the economy, talked a little bit about the demand for data. Brock, let's look at our next set of slides around technical assistance. So this is where, in some ways, the rubber meets the road, right? We have multiple decades, Andy, I don't know, decades and decades and decades of technical assistance as a conservation community under our belt. I wanted to share a few stats here because I think they tell a confusing story, and I hope that we can sort through it a little bit. So the first thing is that when we at Farm Journal are out gathering information from producers, the vastest majority of producers tell us that they are already undertaking sustainable practices on the ground. 84% here. That's from our readiness index. At the same time, less than a quarter of them tell us that they see any market benefits at all to the adoption of those sustainable practices and solution sets. So over here, producers are telling us we're doing it. We're not really getting rewarded for it, but we're doing it. And over here, we have USDA saying, well, like, let's actually look from space. Less than 5% of the 2022 crop was undercover crop. in 22. So, you know, Liz's farm seems to be the exception to the rule there. She's wall-to-wall cover crops, but folks think they're doing it.
But that's to go from 0 to something. I think I could be an extreme farmer. I think there's a show about that.
I think you are maybe on the extreme farming, so that's right.
We had 0 to all of it.
I think that probably is unusual, right, Andy? Yeah.
I'm not the normal one.
So at the same time that we've seen, you know, cover crops have been growing. That does represent like a 17% year over year, not Liz, but the 5%, 17% year over year growth in cover crops across row crop country. Conservation tillage holding pretty much steady, not across all of its acres. So, you know, what I see is producers think about sustainability. They're telling us they're doing it. Maybe it's happening, maybe it's not sure. Let's go to the next slide. I would say that this conundrum here, this dichotomy, has been one that at Trust in Food we've been sort of racking our brains against. Why do producers think they're doing it, but it doesn't look the same on the ground? And, you know, one explanation is we do live in different worlds with different sets of expectations. And I want to go back to the panel and say, is this what it is? But I'll give you a little bit of Trust in Foods hypothesis. As Liz said, she's maybe an outlier, but for most producers, it would seem that the change journey doesn't happen instantaneously, that you don't go from nothing to everything, and that an acre in a new practice like a cover crop or a different kind of nutrient management plan is the result of many steps before, many types of planning before. It's kind of a lagging indicator. And so one of the things we want to know is if the billions of dollars and the hundreds of person hours that are going into technical assistance is actually helping get producers more ready to make a change on the ground. And so we started looking at how would you measure the leading indicators of change rather than the lagging indicator, which is that acre under change. And what we see is there are 4 things that can tell us whether a producer is about to make a change. They're not rocket science. The first is, do they understand whether that change, what the change is? The second is, do they see value in it? The third is, do they think they can do it? Do they have what they need? And the final is, do we know what their trigger for action is? So let's take a look at what that looks like. And just to jazz things up here, we actually pulled data on different cattle ranchers, one in Nebraska, one in North Dakota, one set of producers in Nebraska, one set of producers in North Dakota. Very different geographies, very different economics, very different environmental factors, right? Precipitation, et cetera, in these 2 groups. But what we see is that from place to place, if you look at all the cattle ranchers in Nebraska and all the cattle ranchers in North Dakota, they are maybe similar in total readiness, but since we can score each dimension, what we see is that producers in Nebraska actually see less value than anything else. They feel like they understand it. They are feeling capable of undertaking sort of regenerative ranching practices. We know what it would take to help them move to that, but they're just not sure that the economics or the goals are supported by it. In North Dakota, go back, Brock, one more. In North Dakota, we see something different. North Dakota ranchers tell us they do see value in these regen ranching practices, but they're not sure they totally understand what it looks like on their landscape. So what you would need to do in these different places would be to engage with these folks with different kinds of tools and skills and opportunities, right? Okay, now we can go to the next slide. So then I just wanted to pull up, you know, what does this look like? So we can look at a heat map of, you know, rancher readiness by county, and you can start to see some patterns there. Particularly, you know, you can start to look at where it overlaps with precipitation, where it overlaps with other kinds of capacity, where it overlaps with connection to processing facilities, et cetera. We can also see that ranchers are different in different places. In this case, because we were talking about data, we pulled data about how do these ranchers feel about technology. And what you see is that our North Dakota ranchers are calling themselves tech promoters. They believe that they are on the other side of the line as tech promoters, whereas our Nebraska ranchers maybe not so much, not so comfortable. So what we're really trying to do is understand at a finer detail here, like how do we make the technical assistance that we're delivering more custom tailored for each individual producer and stop making it one size fits all. Nothing in our world today is one size fits all. Why is technical assistance for producers one size fits all? So I think up next, Andy, we have a slide where you can talk a little bit about how does that come to life in the work that you're doing.
Yeah, so on the ground, I really in this discussion want to just kind of level set as we talk about technical assistance to make sure that we're all working from kind of the same understanding here. We look at technical assistance, over the decades, and it's a strong history that we have, but it's really been a fairly limited approach, right? So we go out, we do whole farm conservation planning, we identify those resource concerns on the farm. And then we look to at usually single practices that address the resource concern to the planning criteria on each of those different resource concerns. And then we try to get connected to a government program that can provide some financial assistance to get that practice on the ground. I think one of the things that we see going on all across the industry, and we have a great opportunity to build an example of in our Climate Smart Commodities grant, is really thinking about technical assistance more from the standpoint of a trusted advisor, right? And so when we do that and we go out and we talk to producers, it's really trying to understand the full context of that producer's operation and then really use all of that information that we have to develop strategies or a plan to move forward with the practices that not only address these identified resource concerns, but really help their operation across the board and so that they can reach their overall farm goals. And so you can see there's a whole bunch of different things that I've listed there. And we need to have some input on all of those issues for the producer. And very rarely are we going to be the experts on every single one of those things, right? And so really what we want to do, I think more than anything, is use the intelligence that we have around the human dimensions piece and really use that to connect producers to the right resources, right? I'm not the one that's going to go in and talk to a producer about that succession planning, but how do we get them in contact with the right person to help them do that, right? And if we can be that trusted advisor and get them into connection with the right folks on enough of these issues, there will be real value provided to that producer from that technical assistance that's provided. And then so I think we'll go to the next slide then. And so again, just to focus a little more on this idea of the human dimensions intelligence, right? And so just as an example, we've really been utilizing this data in our CSC grant through our initial enrollment outreach campaigns. You can see some of the examples there on the right side of the screen. What the data told us was that most of the folks that we want to reach out to, it strongly resonates with them to be innovative, but also to leave a legacy, right? And so by utilizing that type of intelligence in our marketing efforts, we've had some really great results so far. To this point, we've had 519 folks go on our website and sign up to participate in our grant. We're trying to work through those lists and get to as many of those folks as quickly as we can. We've got 59 enrolled producers to this point, with 41 of those enrolled producers coming from historically underserved communities. So a targeted audience that has historically been tough to reach. But we're having some great success there using this intelligence. And again, we've so far been able to get practices on the ground over 257,000 acres. So we feel like this intelligence is really giving us the opportunity to make a big impact out on the ground.
Thanks, Andy. Deborah, this is the same vein that we have been experimenting with Environmental Initiative and your coalitions around. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you've been up to? And I think there's some slides here for her. Thanks.
Yeah, I love seeing the other work that y'all are doing. I hadn't seen that, so I love that. Thank you. What we did couple years ago now, I can't even believe it was a few years ago now, but we looked at as the Midwest Row Crop Collaborative, what might be missing. So there was financing opportunities, there's practices that the collaborative was working around, de-risking practice adoption. One of the areas we felt that there was opportunity to explore was how are producers connecting? Like, what do they need to know? Where are they getting their information? And we worked with Trust in Food to really dive into ways to engage producers before the technical assistance. So what would that look like? Could we be creative? And we tested in our research, we tested changes in attitude, or I should back up. We worked with Farm Journal to identify a cohort of about 55,000 producers in Illinois, Iowa, and Nebraska, and really dove into the data that they, data intelligence. And we were able to learn that, of course, legacy was a big value, but also leadership. A lot of the producers in the group really feel that they are leaders. And how could we tap into that work that they already do in their own community around school board or conservation district, and help them develop the confidence to be leaders in other spaces. And we also identified some asset protection values that were very important. So from that, we developed data-informed messaging and images, and we're able to do a lot of creative work around that. And one thing that we learned also in our work is that a lot of the producers just, they feel sold to. They're busy. They're being asked to buy seeds and inputs and equipment and sell and all, buy and sell, lots of advertising. And so we tested an approach that was more educational in nature. So really truly on an engagement approach. So providing information. What would you like to know based on what your concerns and your values are? You can go to the next slide. And what we found was it really worked. We didn't know what to expect, but we ended up with a really robust set of engagement strategies across print and digital platforms that were in both short form and in long form content. So I think the longest piece we had, I don't know, Amy, was it 8 pages or something? It was a lot of content. And producers consumed it. And the work that we produced and put out into the world performed at rates of 3 to 5 times of industry benchmark. And we can talk another time about what those industry benchmarks are and what that means from a numbers perspective. But, you know, it's an example is like, does someone click open your email? And if it's a industry benchmark of 10%, we were above that 20, 30. So that's just an example of that. And a highlight for us, and honestly a challenge, was that the outreach that we designed was successful enough that we had more than 150 producers representing over 200,000 acres contact us and say, hey, we're really interested. Like, where do we sign up? And we're like, oh, awesome. And give us a minute, gotta make some phone calls. So that was really a wonderful opportunity. And this slide, purpose of this slide is to just really think about what are the lessons that can be learned and applied across any engagement strategy. And these are them. And the next slide, and then I'll stop talking, just has a QR code. So we decided very late in the process that we didn't want to just produce a report. We were really interested in sharing a process that is just designed to help people in the conservation community step through what is engagement and how to think creatively using SMART goals, drawing upon the data that you have available to you, and then designing content that pairs with what producers are looking for. So they already have lots of knowledge, but where's the information gap? Going again back to Liz, like you've got creative and curious producers. There's a lot of resources at their fingertips. We just need to, as I'll quote Amy, we need to serve it to them. So, give them what they need, and then they can make their own decisions based on the information that they have before them.
So this is a QR code. Why don't you tell us what the QR code does?
And the QR code goes to the website. This is a screenshot of the beginning of the website. And it is the step through process that we are working with organizations to test and try and tell us their case studies. Let us know whether it worked, what they learned, and go from there.
One of the things that I, a data nerd, loved about this project is that at this reachfarmersfaster.org website that this QR code will take you to, you can actually see the actual data of what we experienced. Here's what we thought was going to happen. Here is what happened. Here is what worked. Some of it, a lot of it worked. Some of it didn't. Here's what we learned. But it sort of shows the difference between when you it's not rocket science, but it is surprising how little it is prevalent in this community. When you start with who the producer is, what they need, and what they want, and you do that consistently, and you find ways to scale it, which these kinds of data-driven approaches can do, you can get much more productive in your outreach, engagement, enrollment, and ultimately meeting your goals. What do we say? Faster, faster and better. So it is a great accelerant, and it's a case study that's all available there. We only have like 5 minutes left. It's been a great conversation. I want to do one more myth busting. So we'll go to our slides on next gen. Go to the next slide. So here is the hypothesis. One of the things that I have heard for 20 years from when I was young, now that I am not, is that if we just wait for the next generation of producers, like we don't need to continue to invest in this generation of producers. If we just wait for the next generation of producers, they're just going to automatically want to do things differently, and they're going to invest in more regenerative agriculture practices and the technology to track those practices. Information we have within our data at Farm Journal Trust and Food suggests that's probably not true. These folks are under the same kind of economic duress and feeling the pressure of taking over operations like any other, self-employed individual would be. But I'm curious, let's do a lightning round. Liz, Andy, Deborah, what's your perspective? Is this just a generational shift that's going to happen, or does it have to be something different?
I think that it's a necessity to adopt today, because if these practices today, there's a difference in dirt and soil, and there will not be soil to grow a crop in if we don't protect it today. So I think these practices are relevant as much today, and we only know as much as we know, right? So my dad did as best as he could. He knew as much as he knew. Now it's my time to figure out, I don't know what I don't know, so I go find out other ways. But I think if we don't, there's a difference in dirt and soil and desertification.
Very important point about what's happening agronomically. Andy, is this just a next generation exercise?
No, I think that the data really confirms what we're seeing on the ground, and that is that as farms continue to get larger, these businesses are more sophisticated, that producers look at every decision from the economic standpoint and take action based on return on investment. Now, I think that's a great opportunity for us because we can go out and show positive ROI around a number of these sustainability practices and technologies. And so, again, it's right, but I do think that actually is a good thing for us and shows great opportunity for us in the future.
Deborah?
I agree. I think that there's a spectrum here, and I just wanted to say that with the corporate and government targets that are now set, there were decades leading to those targets. And while farmers have taken steps to lean into preserving their farms and their soil, healthy soil, there is some, I experienced some tension between, okay, you want me to change today, but it takes a while to implement change on the farm. So I believe that there is interest in that, but the timelines and the patience, impatience, tensions are all at play.
A million percent, a million percent. You know, I will just wrap up and leave folks with just a few final thoughts. And the final thought is behind every acre, behind every molecule of carbon is a human being like Liz, making a decision on their operation that supports their family and that has impact across them and their community. And too often we forget that these are human beings making decisions that are complex and multifaceted. But when we remember to put the human at the center of our efforts to serve producers with what they need, we start to see amazing things happen. We start to see producers raising their hand to say, hey, I want this. And as any human being knows, it feels so much better to say, I want this than grudgingly say, I guess I will do it. We all want it to be our own initiative. And so what we are all charged with going forward is how do we help producers meet them where they are so that we help them want it rather than make it feel like it is being foisted upon them from outside forces. 1% of America farms and ranches. 99% of Americans have an opinion about how that farming and ranching should go. What we're here to remind everyone is to remind us that the farmer is at the center of these decisions, and that ultimately has to be the person who we are all trying to support. So thanks to everyone who hung in there with us for this conversation, for the good question and answer that came in. Brock, if you want to put up my contact information, I'd love to keep the conversation going with any of you who participated or who will watch this later. This is the business that we are in, is helping support producers on their change journeys. I'm Cole at farmjournal.com, and we are here to help any of you on these journeys. So thanks for joining us. Until the next Farm Country update, we will sign off. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy, Liz, Andy. Thank you.
Thank you.